We'll get started here. So I threw this up here in the week folder. My brother-in-law posted that, and I thought it was a really cool picture. So that is my nephew Dylan, who goes to Mesa University or Mesa College out there in Grand Junction. It is on there, BMX and several other riding teams. So he's jumping off, and I've seen the video of it, and it's pretty incredible. He's in the air for probably 100 feet straight down, and so he landed it. He did. Well, I can bring some other videos in. He's a crazy young man, but nice individual. So yeah, there you can see a little better perspective when I bring it out that way. He had a pretty good downhill. So the good thing, their mom is a pediatrician, because he's also broken like his spleen and arms and legs and all kinds of other pieces. So all three of my nephews ride and do some pretty crazy stuff. So, all right. So the good news, it's warm this week. So when I looked, and I'm not sure what the current temperature is, but it looked like we were about 78 degrees higher in temperature than it was a week ago. And by the end of the day, I think it'll actually be more. That's crazy. Only in Nebraska could you run into this kind of temperature change. So get this up on the screen. So we want to talk about this idea of, we put a lot of pieces out. Well, how do we manage this network? So what kind of tools do we have? What kind of resources? How do we manage our secure network? Now, this is kind of the high-level overview. We're not going to give you step-by-steps on every possible thing you can ever do. But when you walk into a situation, you're going to have some ideas and some thoughts. And we're going to look at some other pieces that are out there. So we're going to go back, and some of you have seen this in other classes. Some of you may know it from work experiences. So we need to talk about this idea of languages or protocols. And protocols are really how we communicate. We all have protocols. We in this class, we speak in mostly English, unless I'm up here babbling. And we have some rules about that communication. We know that we have noun, verb. Well, on our computer networks, we also have to have some rules. And so we typically call them a protocol. It really just means it's a set of rules, and so we're all following the same sort of languages. So the most common thing we see is something called TCP/IP. That's how the internet works. That's how our local networks are working. And so it's what we typically use. So it's a lot of different pieces all shoved together. TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol. It's kind of ugly sounding, but it's this language we have that puts things together. So if we look at them and we break it down a little bit, so we have IP. And so we're going to look at this thing called a network stack, Internet Protocol. So it functions basically at level 3, and we're going to show you why. And then we're going to look at TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, and we put them together, and we have this network that we can build upon. So this is kind of the model that we have. And here's where it's a little crazy. So we already had this in place, and then we built a model around it. It's exactly the backwards way if I would have ever told you to do anything, but it's what happened, it's what works. And so we have two models we need to look at. So we've referenced the OSI reference model. So programmers do not throw sausage pizza away if I go backwards. So that's one of our main models. The TCP model really groups them together. So it's only 4 instead of 7 layers. But they really comprise the same groupings. We've just put them together in a lot of cases in this TCP model. The physical area still works here in the network. And then the application, well, it's still that application. It's interfacing with people and other software. So we have to think about this in terms of where things occur. And so when I say I've got a switch, most switches are here at this level 2. They're also in the network layer. If I go up to a layer 3 switch that has some management capabilities, then it lands at this network or the internet layer. So we've moved up. And the data flows up, so either model, data flows up from the bottom up to you as a person on your computer, and then when you type an email, it sends it back down out towards somebody else. So it's really a model of how we flow information inside of our computer, all the way from our application, or if we're using software, we're writing an email, all the way down through that physical. How does it convert into zeros and ones on either a fiber or a wireless connection or a wired connection of who knows what kind? That's how we communicate across there. So there are some things in here. So I said the TCP/IP thing is a little weird because it also has a whole ton of other languages or small programs and language constraints that work inside of it. So one of the best ones we see is something called SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. That's a language where we can control some of those devices over our same connection. DNS, we've talked a little bit about DNS and how big of a target it is, domain name system. That's what converts when you type google.com to a number and tells you where it actually lands. FTP, File Transfer Protocol, is in there. If you've taken Lisa's Parriott's web design course, you've used FTP and you've put a file onto a web server. And you may have done that at your job. You may have went out and got files off of FTP servers. So those are all pieces in there. And we're going to talk about how we can monitor and manage a few of these. So SNMP, so a lot of our equipment, so things like printers, copiers, switches, routers, can all use SNMP, including all the access nodes, to administer or remotely monitor that equipment. The problem is we have to put, like on a computer, it's got to have an agent, or it's installed on like a router or a firewall. So what we figured out, like everything else, you have to update and make sure you're on the latest versions. So right now, the latest version is version 3. There are updates and parcels of that, but versions 1 and 2, if you're still trying to use those, they're pretty insecure. And part of the reason it's insecure is it sends data out to those devices, and it was sending it out not very well encrypted. And so if you could break that string of data that's being sent, now you have an administrative password in a lot of cases on a system. Because most administrators, for lack of wanting to have 14 different administrator accounts, use one, and that is what we can gain access to every device on our network. So, and it's not because they don't want to be secure. It's, again, that balance of convenience versus how crazy do you get with putting items together. So DNS, we said, that's what that maps that IP address to that name. So this database gets distributed, so it's very wide. So every place you work at, every place you go has an original DNS entry. You may even have some at your house. If you actually have a sophisticated enough router, you may have some DNS stored on that router itself. So here we look at something like this where we're saying, hey, I need to get the address for, in this case they're saying Nashville.com. And Nashville.com, well, I maybe am not stored at my local address, but that local computer or my local server or my internet service provider says, well, I don't have that one, but I'm going to send it over to the internet provider for me and that DNS server that I use. So maybe it goes from a local host, like whatever who's around here. So Spiral Communications in Nebraska City, and they send it up to who they're buying it to. So maybe they're buying from AT&T, goes up to their DNS system. Do you know what it is? No, not yet. And eventually, at some point, if it's an unknown address to everybody else, it ends up at what's called that top-level domain service. So again, there's 13 of those across the globe. It ends up at that top-level domain, and then it works its way back down to you. That email address that's sent back and says, oh, yeah, I know where Nashville.com is. Well, this is important. We can't remember those IP addresses. It's even harder to remember an IP address when we use IPv6 because now it's not just a set of octates. It's 128 hexadecimal characters, which is harder for our brains to work on. And now we have all these other addresses that change pretty frequently. So a lot of companies, because they can't pay or don't want to pay or you're too cheap in some cases, for a static IP address all the time, but you need a web service of some sort, we use services like dynamic DNS, where it may change every time you log into your computer network. And so all of that has to get tracked, and it starts really at the bottom. We have, in fact, even below your own internet service provider, you can store those on your computer. And remember we talked about there's a host.txt file. And if you really want to mess with somebody, you can change that host.txt file on their computer. So when they try to go to google.com, you actually show them some other site. You could take them to Yahoo, or you could show them horrific pictures, whatever it is you want to do. Traditionally, you lead them to music videos and other things. So DNS is one of the focuses of attacks. It's not the only one. We've talked about all different other kinds of things. But if you can get that DNS system broken, whether it's on a local level, so now you're affecting a small, or if you were managing to get root level at the top of those 13 domain servers, you control a lot of how that computer, where it goes, where it accesses data. And so on a local level, that malware you sometimes download, you thought, man, I got this great new toolbar for my screen. And what it's really doing is redirecting. When you type in google.com, it's sometimes catching that and redirecting where you're going. So a browser hijacker. But in this case, we need something a little stronger, and we're at the DNS level. So most of the time, you're not going to have to deal a lot with it. However, these are valid questions upstream from you. So if you're getting internet from Cox Business, ask, how are your DNS servers protected? And if they just look at you and go, we don't protect nothing, then I'd probably get a little nervous about what's going on. So the other one that you have used a lot, especially if you've done the web design course, is this idea of file transfer protocol. So FTP, file transfer protocol. We can do it from a command prompt. I think that you guys are using FileZilla in here. There's a lot of different clients out there. So you can use a web browser. You can actually do it at the command prompt line if you really want to. Well, here's the problem. The first iteration of FTP, the way it sends your username and password is in what's called clear text. It's easy to see, it's easy to grab, it's easy to break. And in fact, about every year, we scrape off the Bobcat server because somebody's website got hacked and the username and password weren't valid anymore. And they had all kinds of crud shoved on there. Well, we take that off and we start over again. The reason we use it is to make everybody's life easier in 410. We've already kind of turned your Apple Cart upside down and make you do all kinds of horrible things. We try to make your life easy. It's not very secure. So here's another FTP client, and you're connecting into another server. You're able to upload files and download files. Well, the way we store ours, and we're going to talk about virtualization later, but we have a virtual server that stores ours for your Bobcat website. We can scrape it off pretty easily. But if this is a production environment, that's a horrible thing to do. But even a lot of commercial vendors still require you to use FTP. There are better ways to do it, and so we'll talk about those. couple of ports you'll see all the time, 20 and 21. So just by default, I tend to block them. So if I were to set up that router in the back, I would have blocked this immediately. It's not something I want to use. It's not very safe. So we tend to drop it pretty quickly. No encryption. That's the biggest deal. So yes, you're vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks because I can get it. So what can I do instead? So secure FTP, secure socket layers. There's a lot of different secure technologies. They take a little more time to set up. They require you to have an authenticated password. In fact, some of the better systems now are requiring that two-factor. So you have to not only have a password, but something, another item about you. It's a lot more secure. It's a lot less convenient. And so that's why we see it not being used as much as possible. The other place that we see FTP used, and that still frustrates me a little bit, is we have another version of FTP that's actually very small. In fact, it's called Trivial File Transfer Protocol. So very similar, but it's how we upload files into, at the beginning of some server stages, into routers, into firewalls, into switches. And some of these companies drive me crazy because they still don't encrypt that. So you're putting a file up on something that should be a very secure part of your network, and you don't know that it really got there nobody got a hold of it, nothing changed it, it didn't get snagged because you're doing it unencrypted. So hopefully we can figure out a way to deal with that. And then our nemesis, email. So email has a lot of really nice things. It's how we send you your bill. It's how we send your grades. It's how we send information about the fact of how you're doing in a class. But email also has some disadvantages. It wasn't ever designed to be secure. And it wasn't designed for the file sizes we're sending. And we have to, in most cases, use some kind of a third-party tool. So we have to hire somebody or a company or a service, something like Zix, or there's hundreds of them out there. And now we can send data encrypted. But now both parties have to use that encryption. So a lot of them will have a guest access, so it's kind of inconvenient. You'll get an email, and it'll say, hey, you need to go to Zix or whatever company it is and get this little application player and create an account, and then you can actually send that email encrypted. It's not very convenient. We haven't come up with a universal way to send email encrypted. It's kind of one of those frustrating things. And that's where we lead to some really odd things. So hospitals still send faxes because email's not really safe, at least from a cybersecurity standpoint. Legal documents often have to be sent via fax or in person because, hey, it's not really secure. Documents, I'm working with my dad working on a Medicaid application. A lot of those documents, I have to actually use these weird third-party tools to be able to send and receive. So now I've installed 20 different decoders on my computer. So there's also some other things with it. So we do have something called SMIME. But because we encrypt that whole message, if we're sending out spam, we've also encrypted the spam, or we've encrypted, if there's a malware program in it, we've encrypted that also. Well, now because we don't have a definite set standard for all these different companies, your email spam filter system may not even be able to recognize that there's something bad in there. Or it may actually just reject it. And this is one of the issues I've had at a couple of spam filtering services. Because they can't get into this emails, they just start blocking them. And so it becomes a little bit of an issue. So oftentimes, if we're sending a lot of data between a couple of organizations, we'll actually use these. It's almost like a box, or it's actually an appliance that takes all your emails as they go out, encrypt them, and then you either have to have a software or a hardware client on the other side to decrypt them. It's something I think we're going to solve at some point, I hope. But email is such a big part of everybody's life that we have to figure out some ways to get data across it, I think. I think that's going to be important. So this is just a list of some of the ways that we can secure things. So voice and video. So now instead we have SRTP, so time synchronization. And time is important because it's a lot of times part of our security, and we look at how different are those times. So your computers, most Windows 10 machines are already pre-set up. They go out and they grab that time automatically from a time server and say, this is what time I am. And you can check that. If you want to experiment, go in and manually set your clock back on your computer a couple weeks and then try to go to your bank's website. And it's going to fail. Really, really quickly. It's going to go, nope, I can't get there. So, time, we need a way to do it. Web browsing. Well, we're starting to get there. And in fact, a lot of places, if you go to and their page isn't secured, you get a message if you're on Google Chrome that says, hey, you've reached a dangerous spot of the internet. Don't go here. And it's not that there is really anything maybe bad on that site, but it's not encrypted. So your website, HTTPS, if I look up at that top left corner and I don't see HTTPS and the little padlock, and I'm at something that I know should have some secure data, I'm at a bank site, I'm logging into Blackboard, I get a little paranoid. Now, the flip side of that is what it's also doing is forcing people with small websites, so your local library. They may not have anything on that website other than, here's our website, here's our hours. But now when you go to it with a current browser, it pops up and says, hey, this website isn't secure, and you're going to have to address that. And to address that, you're going to have to add a security certificate to your browser and to your website. And so you're going to spend some money doing it. So Google is pushing very hard for this, and several other security firms. I'm not necessarily sure. If it's just an informational website that says these are pictures at our museum, I'm not sure if that's necessarily bad. The other side of that, though, I have seen some websites when I was working with a professor on a world's religion class that were religious websites, and those websites were badly infected. As soon as you went to them, they tried to install all kinds of things on your computer. And it wasn't because the church that they were going to or had been sponsored by were actually bad. It's that they were run by volunteers and people who were just putting things on, Wix or Weebly or something like that, and they didn't have any clue how to secure or make that website safe. So look for that HTTPS. It's just kind of by habit going, yep, let's look up here in the corner. I'm gonna transfer money from one of my bank accounts to another. I need to make sure I do that. So file transfer. So FTP bad. Secure FTP good. So you can use a lot of different tools for that. VPNs. If I'm anywhere outside of my local computer, I VPN myself back. Or I use a VPN service to go somewhere I know is safe. I don't trust Wi-Fi at the airports. I don't trust Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. Do I sometimes use them? Sure. But whenever I have data, so if I'm just surfing and I'm looking at omaha.com and seeing what the news is, not too worried. I'm going to go to my bank site or my who knows what. If I'm going to log into Blackboard, I use those VPNs to make sure that my tunnel is actually encrypted and I'm not doing anything horrible. They're not that expensive. So there are a ton of them out there. So ExpressVPN is one I've used. The other thing I weirdly use it for, and it's not technically legitimate, is I use my VPN so I can get content on Netflix that's only available in Europe. I love BBC shows on TV, but we're restricted on which ones we can get. So, hey, sometimes Netflix thinks I'm in London, England. But we have people that travel that do the same thing to use that VPN so they appear back in the United States. It works both ways, and it gives you that security. So if you look at them, make sure you use one that's reputable. So I like ExpressVPN. I'm not a shill for them because there are hundreds of other ones out there. The one I've always been tempted to try just because the name is amusing to me, but I've never looked into it much more seriously than just the name, is there's one called hidemyass.com. And, wow, that'd be kind of clever, but then I thought about taking that return and that invoice into my accountant and going, oh, well, never mind, just kidding. Didn't really need that this year. So there's lots of them out there. I encourage you to use one. Even as students, you guys will travel more. If you're an athlete and you're sitting on somebody's Wi-Fi at a school somewhere, it's probably not a bad investment, and there are some that are pretty reasonable in terms of cost. Like, again, it's also another way I can get TV shows and things that I shouldn't be able to get. So other ones we have, so IPsec, we can put all different kinds of things through IPsec tunnels. Secure DNS, DNSEC. So if you see those, you go, yeah, that's what I need to be on. All right. So I want to start out here, and I want to talk about a couple of the assignments this week really quickly. Come back here. Oh, it's supposed to log me out again. Hang on a second. So there's, speaking of sign-in and security, maybe it's just me that's getting that lucky, but our single sign-on seems to be doing some odd things today. See if it will actually let me in this time again. Yay. Yeah. So that's not bad. My guess, though, just based on the name of their site, the Hide My Butt site, is that they always have that sale. That'd be my guess. There's some of them out there that are like that. So let's look at our assignments for this week, and then we'll talk about our discussion board. So week 7. All right. So there is this quiz. There is this reading thing. Kind of important. So your assignments this week, and you get a choice. So 1, 2, or 3, kind of a dealer's choice. So the first choice at the back of your book, and remember this is a weird case. You have to go grab the entire book, because it doesn't, if I click on the reading link, it doesn't actually pull up the end of the chapter stuff, which is weird, but whatever. So there is Project 7-475, which is using Windows Event Viewer. So going in and getting logs and things that are happening on your own computer. So a great resource, shows you how to do that. And then there are a couple of other projects. So software-defined network research and comparing cloud computing features. So here's where I'm going to be mean to those people that are in class today. You don't get to do 7-3. You're limited to choice A or B. I'll show you why in a second, why we're going to do that to you. So Event Viewer is really a great tool to learn, even on your own computer, for diagnosis, because at some point, Windows is going to do something on your computer and make you pull your hair out. Guaranteed. If you have to administer servers, we go in and we look at what's going on there all the time, because it can tell you what's happening and give you some insights and some clues. So software-defined network, that is a newer technology we're coming out with where we don't really care so much about the hardware. Even the network hardware is becoming defined not by what hardware features it has, but what software is installed on it. And so you're starting to see us use some of the other components, and we're starting to create kind of a cohesive platform of all of these pieces being part of our network. All right, so that's your assignment, and then you have a lab simulation. So I was going to actually have us do this in class. So we've talked about virtualization, and I'll yell about it some more. But there's another tool. We've used VirtualBox. VirtualBox has the advantage of being free. That's a great advantage. There is also a free part that you can use as a student, or if you're a nonprofit or at home, for VMware. And so This is actually that lab simulation shows you grabbing this software component. You can take your entire computer, convert it to a virtual copy, and run it inside of a player. It's not a bad idea to do. And if I'm on the business or enterprise level, VMware is a lot more robust than VirtualBox. VirtualBox is great. It's kind of handy to play with, but it's not business ready in a lot of cases. So VMware has a whole lot of levels between it, and it's even got things like vMotion. So if I'm buying it on the servers, I can move that server copy running from one physical machine to another, and if you're on their website, you don't even notice it's happened. Or if you're inside getting information, you don't even notice it. So there's a lot more powerful things out there. So this introduces you to that, and that idea of how we take our computer and we can make a virtual copy of it. So I wanted to do it in here, and we ran into two problems. So one, and probably the biggest one, is I ran it on a lab machine in here to an external drive. So problem one, the drive wasn't big enough to hold the virtual copy and the original copy of Windows. Because apparently 3 years ago, we didn't buy big enough solid-state drives. Who knew? Life goes on. Second problem was the time factor. And so in here, these computers here, it took about 65 minutes for me to do that. At home, I tried it on a machine, and I did it in about 7 minutes. But these are a little slower, not quite as capable. So I didn't want to burn up an hour sitting here watching a little progress bar go through. But it's an interesting, so in the simulation, it doesn't give you that time scale that's in there. So VMware, another way to look at some virtual tools. So make sure you've read. Here's the link to the reading. Again, your assignments probably won't show up on there. There's the PowerPoint if you want to get it. So there is a discussion board this week. And so I want to look at that discussion board really quickly. So we're talking about all kinds of things in here. Best practices, how do we secure a network? Wouldn't it be handy if people had predefined templates and there were thousands of researchers figuring out what we should do? Oh, there is. And so some of this is actually our own federal government. So NIST.gov has a whole list of publications that they work off. And so if I click on this link, see if it'll open in here. So they have all different kinds of titles in here, and we can look at them. So property managed systems, telehealth remote patient monitoring systems. So if you're involved in, for example, a nuclear plant or a power plant industry, there's actually ones for that. So these are all kinds of documents that we can look at that give us some guidance about what we want to do. So, securing small business and home Internet of Things, IoT devices. So, all different kinds of pieces in there. It's a great resource for us to find information about how and what we want to do with some of these. So, please find them. So, here we have one about recovering from. In this case, I'll pull this one up. This is recovering from ransomware. And so it'll have best practice advice as defined by NIST. So if you're at a government website or a site that is governed by any regulations, so power plant, city, you're at a public manufacturer, all different kinds of things, these are a good place to get it. And so this has, I don't know how many pages in this one, 454 pages. I am not going to read all 454 of them, but it will give you all different kinds, including how-to guides at the very end. So, a lot of great information in there. You've already paid for it with your taxes. You might as well take some advantage of it. So, these are very highly organized, and you can see when you go through there, there's a lot of effort put into these. So you can grab one that may have some value to you. Notice they are hyperlinked, so you can jump and go from the title and down to the solutions. It's one of the documents, if your boss comes in and you're reading, you won't get in trouble for reading, most likely. All right. So what I'm asking you to do, scroll down too far. So is you need to find one, paraphrase it a little bit. So whatever topic. So if we're looking at wireless because you're jumping ahead to next week. So you need a couple of things in here, and you do have to respond to a single classmate in a constructive manner. Not just, hey, good post, some way to kind of continue that conversation. Whew. All right. So I'm going to stop here on the recording, and hopefully